great plan if you have the luxury of, being able to do what you're doing, which is to frame it and see what you might need after a year's time.
Yeah.
I think that's really smart.
Well, I have the luxury of not being able to, work on it 24 hours a day. So it's gonna be a year anyway.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by my new boss, Editorial Director of Fine Homebuilding, Andrew Zellner.
Thanks for having me, Patrick.
It's a pleasure, Andrew. Our Senior Editor for Green Building Advisor, Kiley Jacques.
Hello, all.
And our producer, Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Well, we should start off by introducing you, Andrew, because I'm sure it is big news to the folks who listen to this podcast that there is a new captain on the team. Do you want to tell us what you do?
Yeah. First of all, longtime listener. Dreams do come true. You get to be part of it. So I'm the editorial director for Fine Homebuilding and Green Building Advisor, and so I started right at the end of November, that first week after Thanksgiving, and have been kind of getting up to speed on everything. So, the magazine, websites, digital platforms, social media, YouTube, all that kind of stuff. So, it's kind of drinking from a fire hose right now. But
I bet.
I don't envy you.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't either.
And so I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, so it's much colder where I am right now.
So what's the temperature this morning, Andrew, when you got up?
When I got up, it was 14 degrees, which was 20 degrees warmer than it was when I went to bed last night. And it's like, I think we're going to get hit 30 today. And I'm starting to sweat a little bit. So, yeah.
I was really surprised to hear you say that you were a podcast listener. And I was convinced when you told me that you wondered if Jeff's deck would ever be finished, and I think we're all wondering about that too. But
yeah,
it's great to have you here. Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
What do you been? So we should also tell folks. Folks in your job come from like two different parts of the media business. There's the kind of sales and marketing side, and then the content producer side. And I think we were all a little worried where your priorities might be for the brand and our jobs. But you are a hardcore hands-on person. You're pretty much your whole life. You're a musician, a furniture maker, a really hardcore DIYer. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I've worked at a variety of sort of home improvement and woodworking brands over my career. Grew up. So my dad worked in the trades, and he spent the last half of his career as a truss and engineered building panel systems salesman.
Interesting.
And so, we always had kind of a shop in the basement, and there are always kind of like projects going on. Or like when I think I was like 13. We did like a full window replacement. My dad also built the house we grew up in. So I was 13 and helped him replace all the windoes.
So I have to stop you there. Did you like this stuff at that point in your life, or was this drudgery?
God, no. It was just a chore. I was just doing it to make sure I got a little allowance money. And it really wasn't until, I graduated from journalism school in the Twin Cities, and it just so happened a publication called American Woodworker was hiring for folks, and it was, I graduated 2008, 2009. There were no jobs,
especially in media.
And so at American Woodworker, it's I got really hands-on help on how to create how-to content and exposed to this world in a way I hadn't been before. And I also had access to the best wood shop I'd ever seen in my life. And
that's a gorgeous publication.
Yeah, rest in peace, right? But and that's really where I was oh man, I just want to make stuff now. Anything I can do to keep making stuff.
And you still make furniture, right? And when did you buy the house that you work on incessantly?
So we bought our house in the summer of 2018. Interesting house. It's sort of the first one on the block. I live in Northeast Minneapolis. We're right next to a park. House was built in 1906 in the park when Minneapolis bought all of the land for it's called the Grand Rounds. It's sort of our park system. In 1928, it was moved to its new foundation, where it is now. It cost $113 to move this house, a couple hundred feet. And so the interesting thing, when we were looking at houses, I really wanted something that was older, with woodwork and built-ins and all that stuff that speaks to me as a craftsperson. And all of the houses, like before, like 1915, the basements were like dungeony, low ceilings,
it was
leaky.
a utility space. It wasn't a living space yet.
But my basement, because it was built in 1928, is concrete block. The ceiling height is like 7 feet 6 inches to the joists. And
downright luxurious.
Yeah. And so the basement has been kind of my biggest project this summer. When we first moved in, we had one of those springs where like we had a ton of snow and then it rained and then it froze again. And so we got like 2 inches of water in the basement. And, I want it to be usable space. I want our stuff to stay dry. And so this summer, I spent the better part of 2 weeks hauling 15 yards of concrete and dirt out of my basement, 2 buckets at a time, to do an interior drain tile. And so now I'm at the portion where I've got my 2 inches of foam adhered to the wall, and I'm sort of like working on the air sealing. And the other thing I didn't really think about when I was doing this was so the foundation is concrete block, and then the top of the concrete block, there's like a slanted. It's like concrete on top of the concrete block, but it's like sloped inward toward the basement. And it's like the joists are sort of embedded in the concrete, but
What's
not
that
really.
About? Bugs? Maybe keep bugs out.
Yeah, and it like seals the top of the blocks, I guess, too.
I've seen that. I've seen photos of it.
Yeah, so the like air sealing
is complicated.
It's very fiddly. So
fiddly, that's a good word.
That's kind of what I'm up to right now. But it's also like my house is cold, and it's cold in Minnesota, so there's a little bit of urgency there too.
Incentive, right?
Yeah. So do you like this work, or you do it out of necessity?
I like aspects of it. I would be okay if I never had to cut up foam again. Like if I had my druthers, I would, spray foam it all, but that's also expensive. And it's a small basement, it would take somebody maybe half a day to do it. But finding someone who wants to come do that work for half a day when there's much more work out there is a little tricky too. So.
And they have to take care of their builder customers right ahead of you.
Yeah.
Well, it is a pleasure to have you on the show and a pleasure to have you on the team. I could think of no one better to be steering our ship. Thanks.
All right. And so that's it. I can leave now, right? Or just kidding.
Kylie, what have you been up to? Are you still having water issues?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
But I'm taking small measures. The first of which is to get my water tested, which I finally got my lab samples in, and I'm waiting for the results on that. That is not cheap to get your water tested.
Tell me, what does that cost?
$100.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious about the results. It will inform my decisions going forward.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
So, and the health of my brain. I'm a little concerned about what I'm drinking. So
I'm also concerned too, Callie. I want to make sure your
my brain matters here in this context. Yeah.
We all need you to be at the top of your game.
So that's all that I have going. I've been putting the well off for now. This is the sort of the first preliminary step.
Fact finding.
Fact finding is the right.
What was it? Your well? Was it a Sandpoint well?
Yes, everybody's heard about it. So, yeah, it's stressing me out.
Had you heard of this, Andrew?
Yeah. So our family cabin in Wisconsin has a Sandpoint well, and it also has reached that like point where every couple of years we're like replacing a pressure tank and like burning out pumps and
That's where
but
I'm
like
at.
no one will touch it locally because they're just like, oh no, you just
Exactly.
need to dig a real well, and it's like,
So,
yeah.
yeah. So we've spoken about it at length on the show, and I've gotten a lot of feedback from listeners. And the reason I decided to go ahead and test the water was because I need to decide whether or not I'm going to replace it with yet another sandpoint well.
Right,
And interestingly, the lab that I'm using, I spoke with the lab technician at length about where I live and the conditions of what surrounds me. As you know, Patrick, I'm close to
You're
a lot of
in strip mall suburbia.
yeah, and also there's a lot of like there's an auto shop up the hill from me. There's a lot of industry right around me. Even though I'm in this rural environment, I've got a lot of stuff floating downhill. So, I might not want another sandpoint well. I need to to really factor the water quality in. So,
how long is it going to take, Kiley, to know what the
just
test
about
results?
a week. Yeah, just about a week. So, well, I'll let you know. Everybody's following this saga.
Well, I tell you, it's a real problem for so many people. Lack of water, poor quality of water. Many folks don't even know that they have dangerous water. So
that's true.
It's good.
Well, I will say that it was Mark's discovery that he had arsenic in his water that made me really jump on that bandwagon.
Jeff, have you done any projects over the holidays?
Not a one.
Good for you.
Way to go. That's great.
I finished the luggage closet, I would say, on Sunday. This is the space we put up in the attic to store all of any number of weird things. And it's so satisfying to hang things on walls, I got to say.
That's true. That is true.
I can't share a photo because I forgot to put it on the folder, but I will share that later with Jeff, so folks who look at the show or look at the show notes can see what I built. Oh boy, so go figure. The internet has lots of opinions on PEX plumbing pipe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about it last time, but we heard from one of our friends, Austin in Columbus, who Andrew may not remember is one of the hardest core DIYers that I know of who listens to the show. He bought what I would describe as a train wreck of a house, and he's been slowly putting it back together quite well, I might add.
Is he the one whose wife wants to burn it? Start all over again?
Well, if I were her, I would. Austin from Columbus, Ohio here. It's been a while since I've written in, but I had to chime in on this one. As you know, I'm a crazy DIYer who's been working on my total gut rehab for the last 3 years. As part of that, I put in all new plumbing, waste vents, and supply. For the supply, I used PEX-a and B, so I can tell you a little bit about my experience with both. First, PEX-b is exclusively crimp-on. It's the stiff red or blue stuff that most people use. The tool is cheap, it's easy to use, and the fittings are readily available. PEX-a, on the other hand, is expansion or crimp. I don't know about Uponor, but the Sioux Chief stuff from Menards has it printed right on the pipe that it can be used both ways. I got all the PEX-a and expansion fittings off the shelf from both Menards and Lowe's. Menards had a better selection. Everything I needed was there, but it was less prominently displayed. I used a manual expansion tool. It was about $100 and it worked great for both 3/4 and 1/2-inch tubing. I chose PEX-a to avoid pressure loss at the fittings, and because everyone talks up the fact that it is always trying to shrink back down to its original size, so people have a lot of confidence in the connections. Well, let me tell you, I found it very unreliable. We were very meticulous when installing our PEX-a expansion fittings, and I would estimate that at least 25% of them leaked. By comparison, we didn't have a single crimp fitting leak. By the end of the project, we stopped using the expansion fittings altogether and crimped everything. On the whole, I don't think I like PEX-a pipe. I do think I like PEX-a pipe better. It's more flexible and a little easier to work with. Plus, you have the option of using expansion or crimp fittings. I would just use crimp fittings for the most part. What's nice about the expansion, however, is that the work time is great for tight spaces. If you can't fit a tool in somewhere, you can expand the fitting, getting everything in place, and then push it together. It saved us quite a few times. Well, that is super helpful for DIY plumbers.
So I looked into this because I wanted to know what other builders thought about PEX-a
versus B. Boy, we opened a can of worms with this.
But I just one little note. There's a really great series of blogs from Matt Bath on GBA. He's an owner builder in Washington State. But he made mention, he went on and on and on about the attributes of using this product. But he also mentioned, and I didn't get into it, but just something to keep in mind, that PEX-a is more likely to leach chemicals into the from the plastic into the water supply. Have you heard anything about that?
So I've heard that, PEX doesn't leach chemicals into the water, but I think that was probably from the Plastics Council. So, I don't know. Well, have you heard anything about this, Andrew? Have you had experience with these products?
My entire house is PEX-a. That was one of the first projects I did. When we moved in, there was like a weird bathroom thing in the basement that also surrounded our electrical panel. And like,
What kind of thing would that be?
yeah, so as part of like getting a mortgage from the bank, they were like, this basement has to go. And so it led me down like this path of replacing some plumbing. Like we only have a kitchen and a bathroom and a washer and dryer. So like not a ton of plumbing. The bathroom was redone when we'd moved in. And so like there's a run of PEX-b up to the second floor to that bathroom. But I went for PEX-a, and especially with the basement not being super well insulated, we actually like had some frozen pipe stuff too. And so the expansion thing was really important in my mind.
Because your thinking was that if it did freeze, it wouldn't rupture, it wouldn't break.
Yeah. I think it's supposed to be able to expand up to like 100 times its size without, rupturing.
I want to see that.
Yeah. Right?
But I ordered everything from an online supply house and was delivered, and then I ran out of compression fittings because I'd messed a few up, and so I had to cut them open and redo them. And I had no idea you could get them at Menards until a buddy clued me in, and they seem almost identical to the Uponor ones. So, yeah,
you're a fan.
I'm a fan. I actually the PEX-b coming down from the bathroom, I didn't want to like rerun that because I had no idea how or where it went. So I actually like overexpanded a fitting or a compression ring to like fit on
the different stuff,
the valve, and I did that 2.5 years ago, and it's been leak free since then. And yeah,
you're gonna get some angry emails about that, I guarantee.
Yeah, it's not recommended by the manufacturer by any means.
Yeah. So, all right, good feedback. Thank you for that, Austin from Columbus. Send us a picture of your house, Austin. I'm curious where you're at, man. This comes from another longtime listener, James, who's a software engineer from Meta, which I had to look up was Facebook, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, podcast crew. This is in regards to a conversation that Mark and I had about running 12 gauge wire for 20 amp circuits universally. Like, did that make sense? And we heard from James on this. Hey, podcast crew. I personally prefer running 20 amp 12 gauge cable to all my receptacles because it reduces the number of unique configurations of parts in my electrical system and eliminates opportunities for human error. Can you tell that James is a software engineer? By using 20 amp 12 gauge wire for the receptacles and 15 amp 14 gauge for the light fixtures, I can wire almost the entire house with 2 kinds of breakers and 1 kind of receptacle, and makes wiring the panel up pretty easy too. If the cable is a white sheath, it's fed to a 15 amp breaker. If it has a yellow sheath, it's fed to a 20 amp breaker. I use 15 amp tamper resistant receptacles everywhere that I can. With the 2020 code, there are hardly any receptacle locations that don't require some kind of protection. And the AFCI, GFCI combo breakers didn't cost any more than the AFCI only or the GFCI only when I ordered mine. Similarly, I don't see any significant price difference between 15 amp and 20 amp breakers. So you're only saving money on the wire when you run a 15 amp to a receptacle. As for Mark's argument about a 15 amp breaker being safer when you have a short, the trip curve of your breakers are more complicated than that. The nominal current is the level at which the breaker is supposed to not trip. If you look at the trip curves on Square D's QO breakers, the 20 amp and 15 amp breakers are both specified to trip after 0.03 seconds at 220 amps. or 15 times the rated current respectively. If you have a short, the variance within manufacturing tolerance is going to make more of a difference than whether your breaker is rated for 15 or 20 amps. I've attached the trip curve sheets to this email if you want to have a look. So I don't even know what he's talking about, but I am sure he is right. Did you guys see these documents of the trip curves for the 15?
My eyes went crossways. Yeah.
I love the smart people that listen to this show. James, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Exactly.
I think my reason for hating 12-gauge wire is it's so hard to work with. It hurts your fingers. Oh my goodness, I wouldn't use it if I didn't have to.
It's a bad user experience, right?
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
But the user experience of using 20 amp outlets, throughout your house, like never having to worry about tripping one, like that makes a lot of sense, I think.
I mean, I was trying to think of the things that, like say you want a space heater sometimes, you have the cabin or whatever. Yeah, that's a great idea. But like, I don't know, most stuff seems to use less power than more nowadays. Am I wrong about that?
Depending on what you buy, yeah.
Do you have like a deep fat fryer Kiley, for example, that's like pulling 12 amps?
I do not have a deep fat fryer.
Do you feel bad about that? I do. I read today that like 30% of Americans have 2 running refrigerators in their lives. Yeah.
Wow.
What?
I will say that since I installed my Energy Star dehumidifier in the basement, my electric bill has definitely increased. God knows
that's a big honking refrigerator there, Kiley.
Honkin', yeah, I know, exactly.
Yep.
I love winter. Turn it off.
This comes from our friend Dana. Hey, podcast crew. Our design stage stalled for a while, but now has resumed. Our architect is about to develop structural drawings. His last drawings were bid or presentation drawings. And here's what the lake-facing side of the house looks like so far in those bid drawings. As you can see, we're hoping to use black trimmed windows and then match other features to that black window casing. I'm wondering if you or your colleagues might be able to answer this question. Are there any black finished trim boards that are time proven? We want minimal maintenance on our new home and hope to incorporate all black trim, casing, corner boards, and rake. Essentially, we're just hoping to accomplish the look pictured above while also incorporating the most maintenance-free and moisture-resistant products. So far, I found this online. And she has a link to HDPE marine board sheet, black, 12 by 24 by 0.5. So I guess it's 12 by 24 inches by 0.5 inches maybe? Know anything about this product? Thanks much. Happy New Year, Dana. Anyone want to take this on?
I will. I actually reached out to the GBA community to find out if anybody had experience using this in this application. I got one response because I just did it about an hour ago, but I'll share it. I think it's informative and worth reading. Now he's a regular contributor and a builder, so I value his opinion. He has not used it in the trim application, but he's very familiar with it in what he calls generic forms. I'm not exactly sure what that means.
I bet Andrew knows what
Just
this is.
So.
Well, wait a minute. I want to share what this guy has to say. All right. There's some aspects to it that will apply to trim. He says you can't glue anything to it, and I doubt very much any kind of paint is going to stick to it. So you're kind of stuck with whatever color is available from the manufacturer. He says it cuts pretty easily with regular saws, but has a tendency to leave little stringies, as he calls them, on the edges so that you have to trim off. He says that if you're using a smooth surface versus a textured product, it will scratch and mar easily since it's a relatively soft material. He says this is probably the biggest downside of the material for trim work. But on the plus side, it's a pretty impervious material and that it won't react with anything, so it will last forever. But you have to make sure that it's UV resistant, or the UV resistant version. I'm not sure what the options are there, but and that nothing will stick well. So the problem also affects caulking. So it's difficult to get a long-term reliable seal. He suggests you'd be better off with PVC trim, which not surprising. The reasons for that being that PVC is paintable if you're careful, can be solvent welded, and you can caulk to seal things. I have other suggestions based on an article from Mike Maines, but I will stop there. I thought that was valuable information.
This is not what this material is typically used for. Am I right, Andrew?
Yeah, so I'm most familiar with it from outdoor furniture. There's a big manufacturer in Minnesota called LOLL Designs that makes a bunch of stuff out of this. And there's like a sister company who also makes cutting boards, and it's used for like skateboard deck ramps and stuff. And
It's like recycled milk jugs oftentimes, right?
Yeah.
Really? Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's got a huge expansion and contraction coefficient, which is going to make it a problem for exterior trim. And black plastics are challenging. PVC, you shouldn't even paint black. There are some like, high emissivity paints that have dark colors, but they're a special thing, and you need to make sure you get the right thing.
Are you guys familiar with a material called Rich Light? Mm-mm. So, excuse me.
Are you drinking already?
It's a sparkling water.
It's the job.
Yeah, it's actually earlier where I am than it is where you are. So, Rich Light, it's like paper impregnated with resin, and it comes in sort of like this black, dark color. And I was actually looking at it for a countertop material because it's supposed to it wears a little bit, but it's like super impervious, and they also use it as a replacement for ebony on guitar parts and stuff.
Wow.
But you can buy it in like 4x8 sheets, and there is some sort of like cladding uses for it too. So I thought that might be worth looking into. It's probably crazy expensive, but what isn't these days?
So what about Boral exterior or true exterior trim?
Ding, 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 ding. That's what I was
ding,
going to say.
right?
Yeah. Boral's
So
great
there
because
is
you
a
can
good-
paint it dark colors.
You
And
can paint it dark colors, right?
Yeah.
I would recommend to this reader, Michael Maines did a piece called How to Choose Dark Siding. And while it is siding focused, it certainly applies to trim as well. And there's some really good information in there as to like what the different materials, how they will react to being black, essentially. Like what how much movement will result from that color.
Because that's everything,
that is a
right?
problem.
It's going to get hot.
It's going to get hot, exactly. What is that
I was going to
called?
say, like, on your windows, Dana, get your window manufacturer to apply casing of the color, that's the dark color that matches your windows. That's not going to help you with the fascia and the other trim boards, but, let your window manufacturer solve that problem for your carpenters and you.
Well, then what do you do beyond that? After you've got your windows set, how do you deal with all of the other trim if it doesn't match?
Boral, painted to match.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
I don't know. Anyone else have any suggestions? I don't think the marine board sheet is the right thing, though, because I think it's too small for starters. Like, you need long, skinny pieces for trim.
Have you been following, I'm sure you have, Josh Odwin, his build in, where is he located? That cabin that he's building. All the videos that have been going up on Fine Homebuilding. You know what I'm talking about?
I should.
You don't?
I'm sure.
You should, right. I can't remember exactly where he's, I want to say Oregon. But anyway, I noticed on one of his videos that he's a really nice looking, almost black, very dark trim. I don't know what he used, but it might be worth looking into.
I was going to say one other thing I thought of. They're doing a lot of stuff with thermally modified wood now. Mm-hmm. And you can get like some cool, it's not like totally black, but it's pretty dark. But I think when it's outside, it'll still like weather back to a weathered wood look. If you don't, apply a new finish every couple of years.
My other suggestion is, Dana, this like black trim thing is going to be out of fashion in 3 years.
Yeah, there's
try
that.
something else.
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah.
This comes from Keven. Happy holidays, FHB podcast crew. I'm a relatively new listener and look forward to your weekly discussions. I recently listened to number 417, Pro Talk with Bob Kelly, and that discussion prompted this email to you guys for some advice. and motivated me to hopefully take care of this problem once and for all. All right, so we should say that Bob Kelly is like a masonry specialist in the Chicago area, and one of his claims to fame is solving moisture problems in these masonry buildings. My home is a 2-story with a walkout basement built in the early 80s. One side of the house, in my case, the north side, is built into the hillside, which is typical of the homes in this community. I've lived in the home for 15 years, and since the day I bought the house, there has been an issue with efflorescence occurring on the north basement wall. At least that is what I think it is. It is a white, powdery substance that grows on the wall. I have cleaned it off, but it comes back. I don't think it's mold. My plan is to clean the wall with TSP and then paint it with a dry lock product. From what I understand, efflorescence is an indication of water intrusion. My basement is bone dry, and this issue is only occurring on the north wall and starts at the point just below grade. The soils are sandy with rocks. It's easy digging. I've attached a picture for reference. Based on the renovation work I've done, I believe there is a perimeter drain roughly 12 inches below grade, but from what I saw, it is clogged with roots and debris. A couple of questions. 1, is this efflorescence? 2, do I need to install a perimeter drain deeper than the current one? 3, if so, does the drain need to exit to grade, or can it terminate in a buried dry well? Any information or advice on how to correct this problem would be greatly appreciated. Keep up the good work. Well,
I'd say it looks like efflorescence.
It's efflorescence, yeah.
Which maybe some people don't know what it is, so I'm going to define it.
Please.
Right? Okay. So it's harmless crystallized mineral salt that is a result of what he's suggesting, which is water. However, water infiltration. But what I thought was interesting about it is that it forms as the moisture evaporates into the air and leaving the minerals behind. So he's talking about a north wall below grade. So, but he has a bone dry basement. So it makes sense to me because it's evaporating before the water accumulates.
Right. And leaving that behind. Yeah.
Leaving that behind. So that is probably very much, that's what it looks like, right?
Yeah, and it's nothing to worry about.
Nothing to worry about,
having a perimeter drain would maybe stop it, but I don't know if I would go to the trouble. What do you think, Andrew? You like to do foundation drains, obviously.
Yeah, I like mitigating water is like 75% of my battles right now. So
yeah, same here.
Do it like redoing your drain so it's not clogged might be cool. There's probably some tools you can get to clear your drain without having to remove it entirely. Might be something to look at. And then as long as your dry well is like draining over time, you got to check it when there's actually water in there and stuff. Running to daylight, I don't think is super important, but
see, that's interesting because it seems like the general consensus on GBA is to run to drain lot.
If you can, but there's there's lots that just don't. They're flat. There's no slope to drain to.
Right.
Yeah. The only other thing I was thinking about is is the water coming in from outside? Could it be like condensing on the wall or something? Or
so that. If it was condensing on the wall, it would be water vapor, which wouldn't have the minerals in it. The minerals are getting picked up as the water's moving through the soil, and
chances are his basement wouldn't be bone dry in that case, right?
It could be humid, but there might not be like liquid water. Mm-hmm. So I bet you have a little effluence on your foundation walls, Kylie. Am I right?
I thought of that too, and I went down there, and I do not. My walls are just plain wet. There is no evaporation. Yeah, they're just damp looking.
I definitely have it on my basement walls. I bet you do too, Andrew, or did.
Yep. Yeah, there were definitely some spots. I have a driveway along the side of the house and like a paved sidewalk on the other side, and so like water doesn't drain very well away, and there are a few spots where it just comes back every year.
Keven, the only reason I would give you to dig up your backyard and fix the drain or put a new one in is because if you have a heavy rain event, it might not be just a little bit of water; it could be a lot, and then you have a mess. It depends on what you want your basement for. If it's just holding some junk and you're heating and cooling equipment or freezer or what up on, or elevated slightly, might not be worth messing with. We're going to get angry emails about my advice for that too, I suspect.
Yeah, I'm in that boat trying to decide. I mean, you say that, but also it impacts the health of your interior environment. If you've got, say, forced air, or if you have a damp, wet, yucky basement.
Absolutely. That's a very good point, Kylie. If he said his basement was bone dry, which is
Right,
going on,
in
but
which
if it's
case,
soaking
yeah.
wet, that's a
Yeah.
problem.
No,
Yeah.
you're right. His case seems ideal, in a sense.
We got some more questions about basement heat flows and moisture movement. This comes from Flint. We just purchased a home with a CMU basement that is finished with a walkout. Half the walls are above ground. There's a plastic vapor barrier against the CMUs and some lath about a half-inch, and then drywall and paneling. My guess is it's a 2 to 3 R value at best. I want to add some insulation and finish the entire basement in a nicer drywall finish and get to R10 or 13. I'm leaning toward polyiso sheets topped with drywall, but I'm concerned about the existing drywall trapped between the two impervious layers in case any moisture gets through. Should the old installation be removed back to the lath or to the naked CMUs? The minimum I would do is to try to at least remove the paneling and see if any mold is in the drywall. It might then be safe to just add polyiso sheets over the drywall and maybe a drying space with bug screen, or not. Any advice from the blog? He called us bloggers. Are we bloggers?
I know. I noticed that too.
Climate zone 4, air conditioned and heated space. Flint, I'd want to see what's behind the drywall at a minimum too. I'm going to start off by saying that. And if the insulation has any possibility of getting wet, polyiso is not the right choice because it soaks up water like a sponge, unlike the polystyrene products. Jeff, you have any thoughts on this?
Doesn't Martin very much recommend against using polyethylene sheeting in basements? And so,
He does.
so you should really go back to the concrete block and
Seems like a
and
good
then
idea.
do EPS, I think.
And EPS, Jeff, because it's vapor permeable, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And then how would you finish the foam? You can't leave that exposed because of fire hazard.
Right. Yeah. Then I have to do some sort of lath or something. Some sort of furring strip and then drywall.
Do you think it would be a good place to use some of that fancy fiberglass face drywall to prevent a mold occurrence in what might be a possibly humid or damp space?
Is he trying to finish the basement in full?
He says
Like as a living space?
nicer drywall finish is how Flint described it.
I would say it depends on how he's going to use the space. Because what you just described sounds expensive.
I don't know if it is. I mean, I put it in my basement in our house in Stowe because for this very reason, I wasn't sure it wasn't going to get, a lot of humidity on it. It was a pain to work with. I got to say that. You have to skim coat the entire surface because it doesn't have the smooth paper. It's got, what amounts to fiberglass on it. Mm. What do you think about this, Andrew?
One of the other projects I did when I first bought my house was I went in the basement and there's obvious water damage and it was finished with drywall and the no treated wood was used for the sill plate or anything, so it basically just fell apart as I started working on it. So I went back to concrete block and I'm doing it right. And if you're gonna invest the time and energy and effort, it's maybe a little bit more work up front to demo, but I sleep better at night knowing we're doing what building science recommends.
I was going to say, I feel like he said, in case any moisture gets through.
It's going to get through. It's coming. Yeah.
Especially block is really porous, If you have good concrete, it's better at resisting water vapor and movement, but geez.
It strikes me that from all of what I've learned since working with all of you, that it's always best to get rid of the old and start fresh, right?
It seems that way, Kylie.
Rather than just, especially when you're talking about wall assemblies, where there's just so many options from places where
lots of
can
folks
creep.
have regretted not going far enough, right?
Yes.
Then you do it again, and that's worse.
Yeah.
I don't know. The air conditioned heated space is helpful, I want to say. And I would definitely look to GBA for details on how to do this correctly. So, Andrew, did you put your foam right against your block wall?
Yep.
Yep. And how did you secure that? Because that can be a challenge.
I used an adhesive that's rated for multi-material and foam, and I'm going to be once it's all taped and sealed, I'll be framing a 2x4 wall in front of it that will keep it in place too.
Will you be tempted to put fiberglass bats in that wall, or will you just leave it open?
I'm tempted. I'm actually thinking about mineral wool. But it's like I don't know how warm the basement could be, so we'll start with just we'll leave it relatively unfinished, but frame it up for a season and see how warm it is, and if it's warm enough, we'll call it good. But I have a hunch I'll be insulating those walls too.
Well, so I mean, how much foam did you put on the block so far?
2 inches.
So that would be probably R8 to 10, maybe, right?
Yep.
And do you know what the code for your climate zone would be?
I think it. So a wall I think is R15, but in order to stop that, the vapor drive. I'm probably gonna mix up some terms here, but basically, building science told me at least 2 inches of foam, and then we could insulate more. It's all pretty much all below grade, so I'm not super concerned about heat loss, but.
I suspect the insulation requirements for below grade foundation walls are far less than they are for above grade walls, right? Because the load is less.
Yeah.
It's a common question we get on the podcast. What the heck to do with these basements?
Yeah.
I think it's a great plan if you have the luxury of, being able to do what you're doing, which is to frame it and see what you might need after a year's time.
Yeah.
I think that's really smart.
Well, I have the luxury of not being able to, work on it 24 hours a day. So it's gonna be a year anyway.
You get to have a test period.
Yeah.
Test period, right?
What I think is good for basement spaces are steel studs. They're super straight. They're super cheap. They don't need to be load bearing. They just work great. They're not mold food. Yeah. So I would think about that for folks.
Somebody was on GBA asking about, and I can't remember all of the specifics, but basically they had steel columns that they were trying to insulate. I can't remember why. Thermal bridging, maybe? I'm not sure. But how would you go about, in a basement situation, insulating those?
Wrapping them with rigid foam is what I would try first.
Yeah.
So if they have like beams connecting like an outside space or an elevated deck or something, and then connect to a steel post that helps support it on the inside, that
might be the problem, right.
Conduction situation there. You should send us pictures of this, Kylie. It sounds like an interesting space.
I wish I could remember all the details, but it was one of many things I read that day, and I don't.
We're a little building science heavy today, listeners. So if you're still with us, thank you. This comes from Derek. Hey, podcast crew. If you've already responded to my question below, then I missed it and therefore apologize. However, after reading Kylie's article in the new issue, Energy Smart by Design, I have even more questions. So I don't think we got to Derek's question. So is continuous roof insulation, i.e. rigid insulation on top of roof sheathing, preferable in all climate zones? In general, it seems that continuous insulation is an important component of all high-performance exterior assemblies, wall and roof, because it combats thermal bridging. A previous FHB article, I believe by Martin Holliday, about this showed how a roof with just interior rafter insulation could result in frost lines on the roofing because of this. Every house in my neighborhood, when the fall comes, you see this so dramatically, right?
Yeah,
and it's always because the rafters are a thermal bridge. They're connecting the outside to the inside of the house. However, the roof assembly in Kylie's article that Peter Pfeiffer designed over 40 years of trial and error and Matt Reisinger installed has no continuous insulation. Interestingly, the roof assembly Matt used for his own house that he is currently building has 4 inches of polyiso. If roof insulation is used, does it always need a weather barrier on top, e.g. shark skin, or if it has an airspace above, it's similar to Peter's design, is the weather barrier not necessary because it can dry out? Does the underside of Galvalume metal roof panels act as a significant radiant barrier regardless of color, assuming there's no airspace under it? If so, forget my question about foil-faced polyiso below. Okay, so maybe we should take these one at a time. So building scientists love exterior insulation because it solves the problem of thermal bridging, which can be a significant heating or cooling load.
Well, there's other benefits to it too.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So it increases the R value, it reduces air leaks, it limits condensation on the interior surface of the sheathing in the winter months. And we talked about the thermal bridging, and it makes ice dams less likely as a result. So there's lots of reasons for it. Martin
and
is
what
a
about
huge
in a cooling climate, Kylie?
Well, that's a good question. He made me really think about this. What I have gathered is that, and I could be wrong, but it does seem like high-performance builders, no matter the climate, go for exterior rigid insulation.
Yeah, because you've got a bunch of solar energy baking down on the roof,
Right. So right. So
and Galvalume does prove to be a pretty good low emissivity product. I think if you're building new in a cooling climate, I think it makes a lot of sense to use radiant barrier sheathing no matter what assembly you have. And
color does matter, though.
Color does matter, sure. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, when he says Galvalume, I was imagining it was just plain Galvalume. But Galvalume,
right.
Galvalume comes in any paint color you can imagine, including black.
Well, right. And in fact, he mentioned that on Matt Reisinger's house that how did he put it? He still draped a radiant barrier over the 1.5, the battens prior to installing the metal roof panels, but he chose black, which may be why. I think that's exactly why.
Yeah, because it's
right.
You're
absorbing.
You're fighting uphill.
Yeah, he's sort of working against himself with that color choice.
It looks cool. I'm sure that's why people do it.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. Yeah. Boy, that Peter's roof has garnered a lot of attention.
Do you want to describe that briefly, Kylie?
I knew you were going to ask me to do that, and no, I do not. Didn't you just have him on recently about this whole roof system that he developed?
Peter Pfeiffer was on the show, yeah. And I think it's like metal screw-down metal roofing or standing seam, and he puts it on angled battens. Mm-hmm. I think there's often an insulation layer in there, but I don't think there always is. It depends on where he's going to put if he's got, ceiling joists. Even Peter Pfeiffer just puts it in tons of insulation.
He puts the insulation below the roof deck on the inside
these assemblies,
of the attic.
the Fine Homebuilding article, yes, but I don't know that he always does that.
Right.
Yeah, because it's more expensive, I'm sure, than just blowing the ceiling full of cellulose.
Well, yeah, that's the thing about rigid foam. I mean, I think, it seems like the go-to material assembly for high-performance builders, but it's not cheap. Which is why you don't see it everywhere.
Derek, he says, does it always make sense? And I would be like, it depends on your assembly. If you have sloping ceilings or vaulted roofs, and you have, you're expecting to insulate in the depth of the rafter cavities, in many cases you need more insulation on the top of the roof just to get to the R values that the code requires. And there are good reasons for doing that besides that. But if you have a flat ceiling and your plan is to put the thermal barrier on the top of the drywall with 2 feet of cellulose insulation, the rigid insulation on the roof sheathing is not going to help in that assembly. There's no delta T, right? You're stopping the thermal movement at the ceiling level. Does that make sense, Kylie?
Yeah, I have to think about it a little bit, but yeah, I get you. Mm-hmm.
So it depends on what you're building, Derek, I think is the only answer.
Did he say what kind of?
So his house in particular is in Tennessee, Zone 4. He wants to build with ICS because the house will be built into the side of a hill and I'll need concrete walls for the basement. There's a story on top of that is cathedral with a build-out attic, so that's why it matters to him. The south face will have some large windows. They're shaded by a large porch, and I think concrete will make it easiest to span those and not worry about deflection over time. So he's worried about soil pressure pushing his walled over, so he wants poured concrete with ICF formwork. So makes sense. And he's going to put an I-joist roof system which is coincidentally why I was recently in North Carolina to photograph someone building one of these, and there are some considerations, so look for that. And that will be in an upcoming issue of Fine Homebuilding written by Andy Steele of FRS Builders. So, I-joists make a pretty good rafter, but you still are not going to get enough insulation depth, Derek, without putting some insulation on top, is my guess, in your climate. So zone 4 is
I know Ben Bogey is
cold.
a big fan of I-joist rafters, but he does external mineral wool board insulation on his roofs.
He likes mineral better than foam insulations, is my understanding, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, once again, this is another very common question to the FHB podcast. And Kiley, do you want to tell folks where they can see good details for good wall and roof assemblies in a collection?
A GBA? I don't have anything. I don't have a specific link in mind. What are you getting at?
That's
here?
what I'm getting at, Kiley.
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I do have some links that I came across as I was looking at all these questions that I plan to share in the show notes. So, but if you have something specific in mind, Patrick.
No, I knew you would. That's why I asked. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. And these are questions that are still being debated at GBA every day. I think you'd agree.
Yeah, these are constants. Yep, for sure.
Shallow roof assemblies, sloping roof assemblies, basement insulation details, water management details. It's like, boy, you could think we could produce like a whole media company based on figuring this stuff out.
That's probably why GBA was born.
Yeah. And I think it's done a fantastic job of making this stuff accessible and useful to people, right?
Well, I just love the community forum. I mean, just this question, I thought, I wonder if anybody's used this project. And sure enough, somebody jumps on with some great information. I just love that about it.
It's funny, the HDPE, am I saying that HDPE? Like blocks are commonly used in woodworking jigs and stuff, right, Andrew? Because it's slippery.
Like super slippery. Use it for like runners on table saw sleds, and
That's why
Well,
that's why I thought you might be more familiar than any of us.
I actually
Probably used it.
I've used it for drawer slides too. I have our credenza that our TV's on in our living room has functional drawers and their HDPE slides.
I was just thinking about some poor like carpenter or painter years from now putting the ladder up against the fascia board that's made out of HDPE,
just sliding right off,
just being very surprised at how slippery that board is.
Yeah, those are the things you have to think about too, right?
Yeah, I think
what is
boral
it
is
like
a good
to work
solution.
with?
I know there's some environmental impact with converting coal ash to trim, but it seems pretty tough. And all the people I've talked to really like working with it, except for the pieces are kind of floppy, and you have to be careful you don't break them when you're carrying it around. And but it apparently cuts nice and machines nice and fastens well. So, you guys have anything to talk about before we go?
I don't think so.
Happy to be here, and it's fun talking with all you guys.
Was it as painful as you thought it might be?
Because you're going to be getting a lot more invites.
No, it's fantastic, and I think it's a great way to catch up too. Because we're not always all talking, 8 hours a day anyway. So hearing what people are working on, especially at home, and all that kind of stuff too, is fun.
It's fun.
We do this because we really like it, and it's nice to also have a career. So yeah.
Yeah,
right.
It's the best of both worlds, right?
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Andrew, Kiley, and Jeff for joining us. And thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building. Welcome, Andrew.